At 07:58 on April 14, 1945, Captain John Miller lay prone on a ridge overlooking the mist-covered valley of St. Martin, Germany. The war in Europe was supposed to be in its final days, but for the men of the 3rd Infantry Division, death was still very much alive. In his hands, Miller held U.S. Army field glasses, focused tight on the village below. Behind him, his radio operator, Corporal Vance, monitored the static on an SCR-300 backpack radio. 2 miles above them, invisible through the heavy cloud layer, a formation of 12 B-17G flying fortresses was approaching from the west. Their call sign? Iron Hammer. Their payload? 72,000 pounds of M17 incendiary cluster bombs. Intelligence reports from the previous night were specific. St. Martin was identified as a fallback command post for the 2nd SS Panzer Division. The orders were brutal but simple. Level the grid square. Destroy the structures. Bury the command post. Miller checked his watch. 0800 hours. The bombardment was scheduled for 08:15. The mathematics of destruction were locked in. 15 minutes. That was the time remaining before the valley turned into a firestorm. But as the morning mist began to lift, the lens of Miller's binoculars revealed something that wasn't in the briefing. There were no Tiger tanks camouflaged under the trees. There were no sandbag fortifications, no machine gun nests. Instead, Miller saw laundry drying on a line in the courtyard of the large stone church. He saw a nun dressed in a black habit rushing across the cobblestones. And then he saw them. Children. Dozens of them. Maybe 40, maybe 50. Small figures being herded quickly toward the church basement. The intelligence was wrong. St. Martin wasn't an SS Stronghold. It was an orphanage, a refuge for the displaced. And in exactly 14 minutes, 12 American bombers were going to drop enough napalm to turn that stone church into a kiln. "Vance, get me Iron Hammer lead, now!" Miller shouted, dropping the binoculars. The panic in his voice was rare. Miller was a veteran of Anzio and Normandy. He didn't panic under fire. But this wasn't combat. This was about to be a massacre. Corporal Vance frantically dialed the frequency knobs on the SCR-300. Sunray 1 to Iron Hammer. Come in. Over. Static. Nothing but white noise. Sunray 1 to Iron Hammer. Urgent abort request. Over. The radio remained silent. During the chaotic night patrol to reach this ridge, the unit had taken mortar fire. Shrapnel must have damaged the internal vacuum tubes or the antenna coil. The SCR-300, usually reliable up to 3 miles, was dead weight, a useless metal box. Miller grabbed the handset himself, screaming into the void, "Abort! Blue on white! Abort!" The only response was the crackle of static electricity. He looked at his watch. 08:03, 12 minutes. The B-17s were cruising at 20,000 feet. At that altitude, they couldn't see laundry lines. They couldn't see nuns. They operated on coordinates and timestamps. They would release their bombs when the Norden bomb site crosshairs aligned with the church steeple, regardless of who was inside. Miller scanned the terrain. There was only one other way to signal a bomber formation to abort a run. Visual confirmation. Green smoke. The M18 colored smoke grenade. In the chaotic logic of battlefield signals, red meant target, green meant friendly forces or do not attack. He patted his webbing. Empty. He checked Vance's gear. Only yellow smoke. "Who has the green? Who has the damn green smoke?" Miller demanded, turning to the other 3 riflemen in his squad. Private Reynolds pointed down the slope, back towards the valley floor. "It's in the Jeep, Captain, with the satchel charges. We left it when the mortar fire started." Miller followed the finger. The abandoned Willis Jeep was sitting on a dirt road, half hidden by a hedgerow. It was 600 yards away, downhill, exposed. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was what Miller saw emerging from the tree line on the opposite side of the valley. Gray uniforms, the distinct angular shape of helmets, and the low rumble of a Maybach engine. A German half-track followed by 2 squads of infantry. Not regular Wehrmacht. These were SS. They were retreating, desperate, and they were heading straight for the church. The situation had just shifted from a rescue mission to a nightmare. If Miller and his men ran for the smoke grenades, they would be running directly into the crossfire between an approaching SS unit and an American bombing run.
Miller looked at his squad. 4 men against the clock. 4 men against physics. The abandoned Jeep was 600 yards away. A human in peak physical condition can sprint that distance in maybe 90 seconds on a track. But this wasn't a track. It was a muddy slope, littered with craters, exposed to the enemy. And they weren't wearing running shoes, they were carrying 60 pounds of combat gear. The math was unforgiving. If they moved carefully, using cover and concealment as trained, it would take 10 minutes to reach the Jeep. By then, the B17s would have already released their payload. The village would be ash. To save the children, they had to break the cardinal rule of infantry survival. They had to run in the open. Miller made the decision in a heartbeat. Drop the radios. Drop the heavy packs. Keep your rifles and ammo. We run on my signal. Target is the Jeep. Purpose is the green smoke. Do not stop. Do not engage unless you have to. The men stripped off their gear. The heavy SCR 300 hit the mud with a thud. Vance, Reynolds, and Sergeant Kowalski looked at Miller. They saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for the 40 souls in that basement. They understood. This wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was a race against their own Air Force. Go! 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 Miller broke cover first. He sprinted down the slope, his M1 Garand held across his chest. The squad followed, 4 olive-drab figures tearing across the brown earth. For the first 10 seconds, there was silence. Just the sound of boots pounding mud and the ragged breathing of men pushing their bodies to the limit. But silence on the Eastern Front is a liar. The SS unit on the far side of the valley spotted the movement. A German machine gunner positioned in the rubble of a farmhouse adjusted his sights. He didn't know they were trying to save the village. He only saw American uniforms. Targets. The sound that tore the air wasn't the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of an American Browning. It was the terrifying rip of canvas, the distinct acoustic signature of the MG-42, Hitler's buzzsaw. 1,200 rounds per minute, 20 rounds every second. Dirt kicked up around Miller's feet, supersonic cracks of 7.92 millimeter bullets passing inches from his head. The air was filled with lead. "Keep moving! Don't stop!" Miller screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the volume of fire. Instinct screamed at them to dive for cover. Training told them to return fire, but the mission demanded they ignore both. They were 300 yards from the Jeep, halfway. The MG-42 gunner corrected his aim. He walked the tracers across the slope, sweeping left to right like a scythe cutting wheat. Private Reynolds was the youngest, 19 years old, from Ohio. He was trailing slightly, struggling with the footing. The burst caught him mid-stride. 3 rounds to the chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and slammed him into the wet grass. He didn't scream. He just crumbled. Vance thudded to a halt, turning back. "Reynolds!" He reached out, grabbing the strap of Reynolds' webbing. The boy was gasping, pink froth bubbling on his lips. The golden hour didn't exist here. This was the seconds of termination. Miller stopped, his boots digging into the mud. He looked at Reynolds. He looked at the village. Then he looked at his watch. 08:08. 7 minutes. 7 minutes until 72,000 pounds of fire fell from the sky. Every soldier is taught, leave no man behind. It is the creed. It is the bond. But command is about the burden of terrible arithmetic. 1 dying soldier on a slope versus 40 children in a basement. Miller made the decision that would haunt his nightmares for 40 years. "Vance, leave him!" Miller's voice cracked. "We have to get the smoke. Move!" Vance hesitated, tears mixing with the mud on his face. He looked at Reynolds one last time. Reynolds blinked, his eyes losing focus, and gave a weak nod. Even dying, he understood. Vance let go of the strap. He turned and ran. The 3 survivors sprinted the final 200 yards. The MG-42 barrel was overheating. The German gunner had to pause to swap barrels. That 6-second window was their only grace. They dove behind the chassis of the abandoned Jeep just as the machine gun opened up again, bullets sparking off the metal frame. They were alive. They had the Jeep, but they were pinned down. And overhead, the faint, ominous drone of 12 radial engines began to vibrate through the clouds. The bombers were here.
Miller scrambled into the back of the Jeep, bullets hammering the other side of the chassis like hail on a tin roof. He tore through the canvas supply bags, throwing aside ration boxes and ammo crates. His hands were bleeding, skinned raw from the dive. "Find it! Find the damn smoke!" he yelled. Sergeant Kowalski was returning fire over the hood, his Thompson submachine gun chattering in short, desperate bursts to keep the Germans' heads down. Miller's fingers closed around a cold metal canister, olive drab cylinder, a single stripe of green paint. "I got it!" he screamed, holding up the M18 smoke grenade like a holy relic. But in that same instant, the roar from the sky changed pitch. It wasn't just a drone anymore. It was a physical vibration rattling their teeth. The B-17s were directly overhead. Miller looked up. Then he looked at the smoke grenade, and his heart stopped. Physics and geometry were conspiring against them. They were in a depression, hidden by trees and smoke from the firefight. If he popped the green smoke here, amidst the burning gunpowder and morning mist, the pilots at 20,000 feet would never distinguish it. It would look like just another shell impact. To abort a bombing run, the signal had to be unmistakable. It had to be on the target. The smoke had to billow from the very structure the bombardiers were aiming at, the church tower. Miller looked at the church. It was 100 yards away. 100 yards of open cobblestone courtyard. No cover. And the SS squad was now flanking them from the east, less than 50 yards out. They were trapped between 2 fires. The Nazis on the ground wanted to kill them. The Americans in the sky were about to vaporize them. "We can't throw it from here," Miller shouted to Vance. "It has to be the tower. Someone has to make the run." Vance looked at the open ground. Bullets were chewing up the cobblestones, kicking up sparks and stone fragments. It was a suicide run. Anyone stepping out from behind the Jeep would be cut in half by the MG-42. Miller grabbed a satchel charge from the pile of supplies, 10 pounds of TNT intended for blowing up bridges. He looked at his men. Kowalski was reloading. Vance was clutching his rifle, terror etched into his grime-streaked face. "Vance, you were the track star in high school, right?" Miller asked. His voice was strangely calm amidst the chaos. "Yes, sir, 440-yard state champion." Miller shoved the green smoke grenade into Vance's webbing. "Then this is your race, son. I'm going to blow this charge. It'll kick up enough dust to blind that machine gunner for maybe 5 seconds. When it blows, you run. You run to that tower and you pop that smoke. Don't look back." "But Captain, what about you?" "If you blow the charge here..." Vance didn't finish the sentence. Using a satchel charge at this range as a distraction wasn't tactics. It was a sacrifice. The concussion alone would incapacitate anyone near the Jeep. Miller didn't answer. He pulled the friction igniter on the TNT. The fuse hissed, a deadly burning serpent. "Get ready," Miller said, gripping his Garand. 3, 2, 1. He threw the heavy canvas bag over the hood of the Jeep towards the hedgerow shielding the Germans. High above the mud and blood, inside the plexiglass nose of the lead B-17, the war was silent. It was a world of mathematics and cold precision. First Lieutenant Harris, the bombardier, had taken control of the aircraft. He was no longer flying a plane. He was flying the Norden bomb sight. Through the optics, the gyro-stabilized crosshairs were locked onto the church steeple. The magnified image was steady. Harris adjusted the drift knobs, compensating for the wind. His thumb hovered over the pickle switch. Once he pressed it, an electrical impulse would travel to the intervalometer, releasing the bombs in a calculated train. "Steady," Harris whispered into his oxygen mask. Bomb bay doors open,
The hydraulic whine vibrated through the fuselage. The belly of the beast yawned open, exposing the payload to the freezing slipstream. 10 seconds to release. On the ground, Vance hit the heavy oak doors of the church with his shoulder. They didn't budge. Barricaded from the inside. He didn't stop. He smashed the butt of his rifle against the stained glass window next to the door, shattering the face of a saint. He vaulted through the jagged frame, tearing his uniform, landing on the stone floor of the vestibule. The air inside was cool and smelled of incense and old wax. But Vance couldn't rest. He saw the narrow spiral staircase leading to the bell tower. His legs were screaming. Lactic acid burned in his muscles like fire. But the sound of the B17 engines was now a deafening roar, shaking the very stones of the foundation. He scrambled up the stairs, 2 at a time, stumbling, clawing at the rough walls. Outside, Miller and Kowalski were out of time. The dust from the explosion had settled. The German machine gunner had recovered. Bullets began to chip away at their cover. Kowalski's Thompson clicked dry. He reached for a magazine that wasn't there. "That's it, Captain," Kowalski yelled, pulling his combat knife. "We're dry." Miller didn't look at the Germans. He looked up at the tower. "Come on, Vance. Come on." In the B-17, Harris watched the crosshairs drift perfectly over the target. 5, 4, 3. His finger began to apply pressure to the switch. The mechanism was primed. Vance burst onto the small observation platform of the bell tower. The wind up here was fierce. He was dizzy, his vision tunneling. He fumbled for the grenade in his webbing. His fingers were slippery with sweat and blood. He almost dropped it. He ripped the pin out. The spoon pinged off the stone floor. He didn't throw it. Throwing it might cause it to roll off the roof, falling out of sight. He held it. He held it high above his head, like a torch. 2, 1. Harris tightened his grip. Pfft. The M18 grenade ignited. For a split second, nothing happened. Just a hiss. Then, thick, vibrant green smoke erupted from the canister. It wasn't a wisp. It was a violent cloud, caught with the wind, swirling instantly around the spire. Through the telescopic lens of the Norden sight, the gray world of the crosshairs was suddenly invaded by color. A bloom of bright emerald right in the center of the kill zone. Harris blinked. His brain struggled to process the anomaly. Target, smoke, green, green. The training manual flashed in his mind. Green means friend. "Hold!" Harris screamed, ripping his finger off the switch. "Hold bombs! Abort! Abort!" "What?" The pilot's voice crackled. "Friendlies on target. Green smoke on the tower. Pull up, for God's sake, pull up." The pilot didn't question the bombardier. He hauled back on the yoke and stumped the left rudder. The massive B-17 groaned under the G-force. The wings dipped violently, spoiling the formation. On the ground, Vance fell to his knees, choking on the acrid smoke, still holding the canister as it spewed the signal into the sky. He watched the belly of the lead bomber pass directly overhead. It was so close he could see the oil streaks on the aluminum. The bomb bay doors remained open, dark voids promising death, but nothing fell. The plane banked sharp left, its engine screaming in protest, climbing away from the valley. The rest of the squadron followed the leader, peeling off one by one like a flock of startled birds. The roar faded. The shadow passed. The sun hit the green smoke, turning it into a beacon of salvation.
The sound of the B-17s faded into a distant hum. The valley of St. Martin fell into a heavy, ringing silence. Miller and Kowalski stayed low behind the jeep, weapons trained on the hedgerow, waiting for the final assault. They expected the SS to capitalize on the confusion. They expected a grenade volley. But the assault never came. Across the field, the SS commander lowered his binoculars. He had seen the green smoke. In the chaotic lexicon of the retreating German army, colored smoke could mean anything. Target marking, chemical gas warning, or the arrival of Allied armored reinforcements. Combined with the sudden departure of the bombers, the equation changed. The risk outweighed the strategic value of a ruined church. We watched the gray shapes rise from the grass, not to advance, but to turn back. The roar of the half-track engine started up, and within minutes, the enemy dissolved into the tree line. They chose survival over a skirmish. The bluff, unintentional as it was, had worked. Miller stood up. His knees shook uncontrollably. It wasn't adrenaline anymore. It was the crash that comes after escaping death. Vance emerged from the church tower, coughing, his face smeared with green dye and soot. The three soldiers converged on the heavy oak doors of the church. Miller knocked. "American Army, it's safe. Open up." Silence. Then the grinding sound of a heavy iron bolt sliding back. The door creaked open. The smell hit them first. Not incense, but the scent of unwashed bodies, stale air, and fear. Standing there was an elderly nun, her habit torn, her eyes wide with disbelief. Behind her, in the shadows of the vestibule, were the eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting the daylight. They were silent, ghostly quiet. Children who had learned that noise brought death. Miller lowered his rifle. He looked at his own hands, dirty, bloodied, trembling. He felt like an intruder in a sacred space. Then a movement. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, stepped out from behind the nun. She wore a dress made from a potato sack. Her feet were wrapped in rags. She walked up to Miller. The battle-hardened captain froze. He didn't know what to do. He had trained to kill Nazis, not to comfort children. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, hard rock piece of black bread. It was likely her ration for the day, maybe for the week. She held it out to Miller, a peace offering, or perhaps gratitude. Miller took the bread. He looked at the B17s disappearing on the horizon, then down at the girl. Tears cut tracks through the grime on his face. He fell to his knees and wrapped the girl in a hug. Kowalski and Vance turned away, wiping their eyes. In that moment, the war didn't exist, only the humanity they had fought to preserve. But the cost was paid in full. An hour later, they walked back up the slope to recover Private Reynolds. He lay face down in the mud, hands still clutching the grass. They carried him down. There were no cheers, just the heavy silence of debt. A life for 40 lives. The arithmetic of war is always cruel. Looking back at the incident at St. Martin, military historians and tacticians can draw 3 critical lessons written in blood that apply even today. Lesson 1. The failure of technology and the fog of war. The 3rd Infantry Division relied heavily on the SCR-300 radio. It was the cutting edge of 1945 tech, but a single piece of shrapnel turned it into junk. Modern armies often fall into the trap of trusting sensors and data links implicitly. Miller survived because he didn't trust the tech. He trusted his eyes. He recognized the human intelligence, that contradicted the electronic orders. The lesson? Technology is a tool, not a master. When the screen goes black, the soldier must still be able to think, act, and adapt. Lesson 2. The burden of command is the lesser of 2 evils. The moment Miller ordered Vance to leave Reynolds dying in the mud is the hardest decision a leader can make. It violates every emotional instinct, but logically, stopping to save one man would have doomed 40 children and the entire squad. This is the brutal utilitarianism of combat command. A leader cannot afford the luxury of hesitation. Miller acted with strategic empathy, sacrificing the immediate emotion for the greater good. It's a scar he carried forever, but it was the only correct choice. Lesson 3. Moral courage versus physical courage. Physical courage is charging a machine gun nest. Moral courage is disobeying an order or risking friendly fire to do what is right. Miller and his squad risked court-martial were being killed by their own bombers to save enemy civilians. Technically, they were in German territory. In war, it is easy to become a machine, to follow coordinates and kill indiscriminately. Holding on to one's humanity when the world is burning requires a bravery that no medal can recognize. John Miller never received a medal for St. Martin. The mission was classified as a communications failure to avoid embarrassing the Air Corps. He returned home to Ohio, became a high school history teacher, and rarely spoke of the war. But in 1985, a package arrived at his doorstep. It was postmarked from Germany. Inside was not a medal, but a photograph. It showed a large family gathering in a garden, men, women, and children. In the center sat a middle-aged woman holding a newborn baby. A note was clipped to the photo, signed by Hilda, the girl with the black bread. It read, "The baby in my arms is my first grandson. We named him John. Because you ran, I grew up. Because you bled, 3 generations of my family breathe today." That letter was his Medal of Honor. It reminds us that while wars are fought by armies, they are survived by people. The arithmetic of war says 1 life for 1 life, but Miller proved that saving 1 life can save a future bloodline. If this story of the green signal moved you, don't keep it to yourself. History is filled with these quiet moments of grace that get buried under the statistics of death. Hit that like button. It tells YouTube that stories about humanity matter just as much as stories about firepower. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the declassified past. And let me know in the comments, if you were in Captain Miller's shoes, knowing the risks, the 5% chance of survival, would you take that race? Let's discuss below. Have a great day and see you on the next front.